Hi, I think we will start. I'll first speak in Cantonese first. Hello 大家好啊，咁而家係正式開始我哋今日嘅澳洲移民嘅 webinar 啦。今日嘅 webinar 咧就主要係中原移民我哋自己安排嘅啦。咁昆士蘭政府會有代表會分享移民嘅資訊啦。另外我哋亦都邀請到Moelis 啦，係澳洲上市嘅投資公司嚟嘅。咁主要可以幫到大家解答咧關於188C 嘅投資選項上面嘅情況嘅。咁今日嘅 webinar 咧就主要係頭先講個流程啦，我會先簡介一下澳洲各個移民嘅項目先啦。咁另外咧就係Queensland 政府嘅Mckean 咧就會係簡介一下當地嘅移民嘅情況啦。跟住咧，我哋都邀請到 Moelis 嘅 Enda 咧就去解答一下呢個188C 嘅投資選擇應該點樣揀啦。咁最後一個 section 咧就係 Q&A 嘅 section 嚟嘅。咁事不宜遲啦。咁我哋先簡單介紹一下自己先嚇。咁我哋中原咧，好多香港嘅朋友都會知道中原係做地產㗎啦。其實我哋1978年就開始我哋嘅業務啦。咁我哋中原移民咧，其實就2008年已經開始提供移民嘅服務㗎啦。咁距今都係10幾年啦。咁我哋喺中原集團入邊咧，就嗰個表現都算係幾好啦。咁18、19年其實我哋都係集團冠軍嚟嘅。咁就我哋主要都係明白到啦，移民其實會影響到一家大細每一個成員嘅生活啦。所以咧，我哋尤其係着重喺一個前期嘅評估上面，移民嘅前期嘅評估上面。咁咧因為移民嘅時候，好多朋友都應該要了解到幾樣嘢，有幾個重要嘅因素嘅。第一樣嘢咧就係話你移民嘅時候係攞一個咩嘅身份啦？究竟你係攞個永居啊，還是係可以 target 攞到護照咧？你攞你嘅身份嘅時候，需唔需要居住咧？有冇居住嘅要求咧？當然仲有其他嘅因素啦，例如金額等等嘅語言嘅要求啦。咁嚟緊呢度咧就係核心之一啦。咁咧就會簡介一下移民澳洲移民主要嘅方式先嘅。其實主要分兩大嘅類別啦。第一類咧就係188系列嘅，第二類就132系列嘅。咁嗰個最大嘅分別咧就係在於188系列咧就先攞個 visa 先所以佢叫做 professional 嘅。咁132系列咧就佢係可以直接批個永居出嚟，所以你大家會見到permanent 啦嚇。咁簡介一下就188下邊咧，其實有幾種嘅形式嘅。咁第一種咧就係要開公司嘅，咁佢嘅投資額相對嚟講會比較少啦嚇，係80萬嘅澳紙嘅。咁但係會其他嘅要求會比較多少少啦，要計分啦同埋有年齡嘅限制啦同埋咧最重要有一樣嘢，我都紅色 highlight 咗㗎啦。申請人需要自己擁有自己嘅公司嘅，咁就過去嘅4年咧，最少2年公司營業額咧係有50萬嘅澳紙或以上嘅。咁所以呢個就會收窄咗一個申請人嘅涵蓋嘅範圍啦。咁去到188B 啦，其實比較多受香港人歡迎嘅其實。原因就係話咧可以投資呢個澳洲政府嗰個債券嘅，咁個金額會多啲㗎啦。150萬嘅澳紙亦都有啲限制，亦都係要計分啦，同埋有年齡限制啦。資產要求亦都係225萬嘅澳紙啦。最比較困難一樣嘢就係要直接要證明自己有最少3年嘅直接嘅投資經驗同埋5年入邊你真正有投資嘅金額咧，要達到150萬澳紙或者以上咁樣。咁所以要證明自己有一個投資經驗呢一 part 咧，就相對嚟講唔係話咁容易啦。咁去到188C啦，呢個係最簡單㗎啦。 咁但係咧個金額咧就係500萬澳紙，相對嚟講會比較高少少啊，亦都唔需要考英文啦。啊，大家見到我個表入邊寫話要 functional 嘅 English， 其實咧佢可以用呢個簽證費去代替嘅，咁基本上就其實等於係唔需要考英文啦。咁亦都係會比較快一啲嘅，申請時間3至9個月就會有㗎啦。咁188E 咧，大家要留意啦。咁坊間有啲移民顧問會講話，我全套服務都可以做到188E 嘅。咁但係188E 嗰個金額咧，其實就唔係話申請人自己攞出嚟嘅。你見到20萬可能好少啦。佢係需要獲得政府認證嘅風投資金嘅注資，即係啲錢就唔係你攞出嚟嘅。係你吸引到人來，而且係硬性規定要考英文啦，每科要考6分嘅。咁開嘅公司咧，喺澳洲要開公司啦，要做生意啦。咁你用你自己嘅 business plan 去吸引到資金投資咧。咁你開嘅公司咧，你起碼要佔嗰間公司30%以上嘅股份嘅，同埋唔可以就咁賣生意嘅。頭先講嘅188A 咧，反而其實你有一個揀到一個心儀嘅澳洲嘅企業嘅話，其實你可以俾錢去買咗佢都 OK 嘅。咁去到132A 同埋132B 咧，其實就同188嘅系列好相似嘅。132A 咧就類似於188A 啦，大家見到啦，只不過投資額唔同咗啦，同埋個好處咧就係可以直接攞永居。咁132B 咧就類似於188E 嘅，但係個投資額又係高咗啦。咁100萬嘅澳紙。咁主要係呢一個申請嘅時候要注意嘅地方啦。呢度係咁嚟到下一步啦，就係話大家都想去攞個永居噶嘛，攞個永居嘅身份。有咩要求咧？188嘅系列入邊咧，需要滿足特定嘅居住嘅要求啦。188A 嘅話就2年要住1年啦。B 嘅話就4年住2年。C 咧又係啦，因為金額大，投資金額大，其實佢個要求會低少少嘅。主申請人咧淨係需要住160日嘅啫，4年入邊住160日。受養人就4年入邊住180日，即係自己嘅配偶啦。188E 咧都係要4年住2年嘅。要留意一樣嘢就係啦，好多朋友都會想了解188A 點做啊，點樣攞永居啊。咁你必須係要真實咁樣去經營嗰個生意啦。同埋個生意嘅營業額咧係有要求嘅咯，係要達到30萬嘅澳紙或者以上，同埋創造2個就業職位嘅。咁喺呢一點上面咧，188A 同埋 E 咧個要求就係基本上係一樣嘅，係啦。咁咧頭先講到呢一個步驟咧，其實就係去攞永居嘅步驟啦。好多香港嘅朋友都大多數都需要攞埋嗰個護照入籍成埋公民，攞埋 passport 嘅。咁有啲咩要求咧？第一樣嘢好簡單啦，你一定要成為永久居民先嘅。同埋申請入籍之前嘅4年咧，就離開澳洲唔可以多於12個月3、4、12，即係每年9個月啦。如果平均嚟講，要住喺澳洲每年9個月啦。另外咧就硬性規定啦，最後嗰年啦肯定唔可以離開澳洲多過90日同埋有個重點啦，考試入籍試係需要考嘅，同埋考到要75% 以上，即係75分以上啦，平均分要75分以上，咁先可以成為澳洲嘅公民啦。咁呢一 part 咧就係我嘅部分啦。咁我就簡單介紹咗嗰個移民嘅方式啦。咁下一部分咧就輪到係昆士蘭政府嘅代表Mckean 同我哋去介紹一下昆士蘭嘅移民嘅情況啦。Hi, Greg.
Hey, there we are. Hey, well, good evening, everybody in Hong Kong. I assume you're all in Hong Kong. My name is Greg Mckean. I'm the Manager of Business and Skills Migration Queensland. So we are the government agency that does the nomination to the Commonwealth Government for business and skilled visas. So the business visas that we nominate for are the standard ones, the 132 and the 188 suite of visas, and we also do skilled migration as well, so 190 and the regional 491. So what I thought I'd do is just give a bit of background about the Queensland economy, a bit of a snapshot. as many of you would know, Queensland is in the top right-hand side of Australia, just above New South Wales, where Enda is right at the moment. The Queensland economy is about 350 billion Australian dollars, which is bigger than New Zealand, it's bigger than Portugal, it's bigger than Vietnam. So quite a substantial economy in its own right in the Asia Pacific. These figures are a little old now, so each year for domestic and international tourists, Queensland gets 25 million people visit our state. And that's the entire population of Australia. So the entire population, domestic and international visitors, 25 million come and visit us each year for our tourism. Unfortunately, the COVID at the moment has put a dampener on all of that, but that means there's lots of space for us Queenslanders to enjoy our holidays, which are coming up. Queensland itself, ideal gateway for the Asia Pacific. We have 6 international airports, which is unusual. That's because our tourism industry is spread far and wide up and down our coast, which is about 3,000 kilometres long. So we have 6 international airports. We have a system of regional airports as well. We have 15 major seaports in Australia, 7 bulk shipping terminals for our minerals to be exported around the world, and connecting all of that infrastructure is the extensive road and rail network, which is consistently updated. Our exports grow between 15 and 20% each year. Obviously, once again, there'll be a bit of a downturn this year, although with China being one of our major minerals and agriculture export markets, that will rebound very quickly. And of course, we're known as the Sunshine State and the Tourism State of Australia. So even though we're in the middle of our winter time here, today was a lovely 22 degrees. It'll be a bit colder tonight than normal, probably down to around 10 degrees centigrade. So, and in the summertime, average is around 30 degrees centigrade, and the nighttime temperature around 20 degrees. So a very stable, consistent climate with over 300 days of sunshine each year. So the business program that we run. Okay, so but as Anderson mentioned, so we nominate for the 132 permanent visa, under 55 years of age. The specific thing for Queensland, we want to see what type of business that you're going to plan to operate here in Queensland itself. So we ask you to submit a business proposal that we can consider in looking at migrants' applications. For Queensland, $1.5 million to be transferred to the state, with $1 million into a business and $500,000 going into a residential property for your settlement purposes. We then go to the subclass 188A provisional visa. It's a 4-year visa. For this visa, under 55 years of age, there's a points test. Once again, for Queensland, we want you to submit a business proposal because you must invest in a new or existing business. For our minimum investment requirements to transfer to Queensland is $800,000, which a minimum of $200,000 must go into your business. The 188 investor stream, that's where you submit, you put $1.5 million into a Queensland Treasury Corporation bond, and then we also insist you bring in $750,000 for your settlement costs, for your housing and to set up your permanent residence in Queensland. For this visa, you must also reside in Queensland for 2 years of the 4-year provisional visa, and of course, at the end you transfer to your permanent visa. I won't go too much into the insignificant investor stream. I know Enda's presentation will do that. So it's a standard investment vehicle that Enda will let you know about. A bit more about Queensland again. We have a world-class education system. We have 10 universities situated all around our state. Our three major universities in Brisbane here, the Queensland University is in the top 50 in the world. Queensland University of Technology in the top 100. And the range of other universities certainly very well credentialed in terms of international sense. We're a very safe and healthy, family-friendly environment. Very much encourage families to come and set up here. Wonderful advanced health services that we provide, both in a public and a private sense. And I guess Queensland's affordability against the southern states for housing. Probably in most cases our housing costs half as much as you would have to pay in Sydney or in Melbourne itself. We're all very much already a very multicultural city. 200 different nationalities from around the world live here. If you go down the main street of Brisbane in our major CBD, you'll see already very much an Asian face is very prominent in our city. And as I mentioned, we have a wonderful climate here so that you can go out and enjoy our wonderful beaches and mountains and our tourism and leisure industries. As I mentioned, healthcare in Queensland, we have a system of private and public health. You pay your taxes and you're eligible for a public hospital bed for free. But if you wanted to have a private healthcare in Queensland, you can do so by engaging a health provider, and then you get a private bed in a hospital of your choice. And just with aside from that at the moment, we are a big research medical state as well. So University of Queensland, where we train the majority of our clinicians and doctors, they're at the forefront of developing a COVID antidote at the moment. So we're looking forward to Queensland University assisting all health providers over the world to get that developed quickly. There's a list of our universities throughout Queensland, as I said, 10 of them. They're scattered all the way up and down our coastline and also in our regional areas as well. Reasons to invest in Queensland. We have a very substantial food and agri-business sector. We supply 30% of Australia's horticulture, and we also have 50% of Australia's cattle herd in Queensland as well. So a significant agribusiness provider, not only for our own consumption, but very much so for export markets. Mining and resources, we're the largest coal miner, exporter in the world. Many other minerals and rare earth materials as well are mined here. Another big industry for us in Queensland. As I mentioned earlier, we are the tourism capital of Australia. You can see there, that's the humpback whales that migrate up and down the Queensland coast from now through till to September, October. So wonderful time now to come down to Queensland when we can let you in and see some wonderful tourism spots that we have here. Our international education, very much any one time in Queensland, in normal circumstances, we have around about 100,000 students, international students, studying in Queensland. So a big industry for us. Our knowledge and health industries, another big one as well. And of course, our urban development and infrastructure is very modern. And I'll go into that a bit more a bit later about what's being developed now and over the next 10 years. So the reason to do business with Queensland, we have a strong economy. Our economy has averaged 3% over the last 30 years. It stays a very constant growth rate. We're very lucky because we have a very broad industry base here in Queensland. So the ones I said to you before, other states and territories will have a focus on maybe one or two of those sectors. But for Queensland, very diverse economy. So when one part of the economy is going down, the other parts of the economy still keep us buoyant. So we keep that average 3% growth each year. Our time zone with Hong Kong, of course, eastern part of Australia only 2 hours behind, so definitely makes doing business between our state and most of Asia very easy. We're a pro-business government here, looking to import innovation and knowledge-based industries. So if any of the clients have access to that, there are many government programs and financial assistance that's available to set those types of industries up in our state. And as I mentioned earlier, we have major air routes coming in and out of Queensland, up and down the coast. In normal circumstances, around 120 flights each week to different parts of Asia. And there's Brisbane at night time. You can see my building is on the far right, top right-hand side, the biggest building there. That's the Queensland Government building. Right beside it is a brand new casino that's being built, and I'll show you a photograph of what that'll look like very shortly. But Brisbane itself is the capital city of Queensland. 2.5 million people live in Brisbane itself, in the greater southeast, which goes from the Gold Coast about 100 kilometres to the south to our Sunshine Coast 100 kilometres to the north. 3.5 million people live in that area there. So the majority of our 5 million people in the southeast corner, but still a very decentralised state, and we have large cities up and down the coast as well. And there you can see is a pictorial of our building, my building, which is the only one that's currently standing at the moment. Beside it is a brand new casino that's just come out of the ground now, so they're just getting to the ground floor of that casino. And behind it is 2 6-star hotels and accommodation precincts that are being built. Part of the river is being reclaimed at the front of our building, and there'll be a marina there, parklands for restaurants, spas, entertainment areas. So it will be a significant part of our city when it's finished in about 3 years' time. Other parts that are being constructed in Brisbane as we speak, we have a major international cruise terminal that's being finished. That will be open by the end of this year, and once that's opened, we'll be able to take the largest cruise ships in the world to come in and dock at our Brisbane port. So that'll increase tourism to the southeast enormously. We also have a Brisbane Metro that's currently being built. That will put a high-speed electric train in and around our city area, our CBD and the inner suburbs. So any journey within 10 k's of the Brisbane city will be about a 10-minute journey. So very quick and efficient to get our CBD and its occupants out to their homes itself. For tourism, as I said, major capital for tourism. We're constructing a new aquarium in the city itself. A new theatre is being constructed, and an outdoor entertainment centre also being constructed. So the idea of all these facilities being constructed in the CBD is our population of the centre of town is expected to double in the next 10 years. So right now there are many accommodation, residential high-rise that are being built, and a number have already sold out, and it's no surprise that many of the people who have taken that up are from China and Hong Kong, Taiwan. So a very, very popular place for for living over the next 10 years when it's all complete. If you're interested in knowing more about Queensland itself, we have a very up-to-date website. On there you can see the different business programs that we have. Our cities and our regional areas are profiled, so you can get an understanding what it's like to live in different parts of Queensland itself. And of course, where there's the latest news and events in the migration field, we'll have that up on there as news and events occur. So encourage you to have a look at that website if you can. You'll learn more about Queensland. And there is our contact details for our head office in Brisbane. So happy for you to contact me at any stage. And of course, when flights are open again to come into Brisbane itself, into Australia, more than happy to meet you personally at our main government headquarters in Brisbane here and tell you more about Queensland itself. So on behalf of the Queensland government, I'd really like to thank Anderson and Centre Line for the opportunity to present, and I look forward to the Q&A a bit later on. So I'll hand it back to you, Anderson.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for your introduction about the Queensland situation. And then I shortly speak in Cantonese. 咁頭先Greg 咧就同我哋講咗簡單就係個移民嘅情況啦、條例啦，同埋就係昆士蘭省各方面嘅發展啊，點樣適合大家去移民嘅。咁下一 part 咧就我哋邀請到Moelis 嘅 Enda 啦，同我哋做一啲簡介，就主要佢哋公司係做投資嘅，佢亦都係咧喺澳洲上市嘅，咁佢哋可以幫到大家係 188C 上面嘅申請嘅投資嘅選擇。
Hi, Anderson.
Yes, please, I just have introduced you. You can start your part. Thank you.
Right, Anderson, thank you very much for having me today to speak to you, and thanks to all who've dialed in to listen. Today I'm going to speak a little bit about our company and talk about the 188C or SIV visa, particularly from an investment perspective. So I'll talk about the investment requirements for that visa. It's a great pleasure to talk to you in Hong Kong. I'm currently in Sydney, in New South Wales. It's a great pleasure also to take part with Greg. We've done many of these events with Greg in the Queensland government, and looking forward to getting up to Queensland with my family again soon once the borders reopen there as well. So just a very brief introduction to Moelis. I'm going to give you some very high-level information today and look forward to any further questions either today or following the presentation. But a bit about our company. We started life as the international arm in Australia of Moelis & Company, which is a listed investment bank listed in New York with offices all over the world. So they've got offices in 20 different cities, including in Hong Kong. So they've got an office in Admiralty at Pacific Place. And here in Australia, we've got offices in Melbourne and Sydney currently. Now, our Australian business is listed on the Australian Stock Exchange. We have three main divisions, being corporate advisory or M&A. We have an equities division which does research and broking, and then asset management, which is where I work, myself and my team work in asset management. We manage about $5 billion of assets for clients from all over the world, including many from Hong Kong and China, but also from Europe, the US, Middle East, and many Australian high net worth investors as well. So a little bit about our funds under management. We've got many real estate assets under management, including both passive and more active real estate like hotels, aged care, pubs, childcare, and so on. We've got a lot of credit funds. We lend to companies and to real estate, and also some private equity and venture capital funds. So as I mentioned, we've got offices here in Australia, in Sydney, Melbourne, but we also have two people in Hong Kong, in Shanghai, and in Beijing. So our head of our firm, our asset management division, is a guy called Andrew Martin, who previously worked at UBS. He was head of infrastructure funds management at UBS. And Richard Collis is our chairman. Richard Collis previously was on the advisory board of JP Morgan and also chairman of ING Real Estate here in Australia. So as I mentioned, we've got a large team, a client-facing team, including myself, and we've also got two others, Catherine and Jimmy, based in Hong Kong. Jimmy's also Cantonese speaker, Catherine's Mandarin speaker. So we're a member of the Migration Institute of Australia, the Financial Services Council, the Australia-China Business Council, and AusCham there in Hong Kong. And we were also the winners of the AusCham Australia-China Business Awards last year. So a little bit more about the Australian Significant Investor Visa. So you've heard a little bit from Greg and Anderson earlier today about different visa classes under the Business and Investor Visa Program for Australia. And the SRV is just one category of that program. In fact, there's relatively few SRVs given out each year. There's about 200 visas a year. But it's it's the premium visa that Australia offers. So it's targeting high net worth investors and successful business people to come to Australia, migrate here, invest here, and hopefully their families will come down and go to school here and university as well. So since the program began, there's been about 2,300 visas granted. There's roughly about 15 to 20 a month, and as I mentioned, just under 200 were granted last year during the financial year. So it's a very popular program. It's been consistently popular since it was introduced. First visa was granted in 2012, but it's just one of a number of visas that Australia grants to business people. In terms of source countries, it probably won't surprise you to see that China dominates. China accounts for about 85% of the total number of SRVs granted. But Hong Kong has really been growing. Hong Kong is now second on the list. You're looking at about 4 to 5% of the total coming from Hong Kong, followed by South Africa, Malaysia, Vietnam, and then the rest of the world. So Australia is becoming a very popular destination for business migrants, particularly in recent months. We've seen a large increase in demand for many reasons, but of course Australia is seen as a very stable and safe location. And particularly after COVID, Australia has been seen to have handled that crisis very well. We have relatively few deaths, relatively few cases, certainly compared to other Western countries like the UK and US. Australia has handled this very, very well. And investors are saying that they feel a lot more confident in Australia in migrating here and investing here. So in terms of what you can invest in, there is really three main parts to that. This is what we call the Complying Investment Framework. And these are the rules that were set by the Australian government for investors who want to obtain an SRV in Australia. So the rules were set back in 2012, and then they were amended in 2015. And then the government required you to invest part of the capital into venture capital or private equity, part of the capital into listed companies, we call small caps, that are under 500 million. And then the balancing investments, so 3 out of the 5 million, they allowed you to choose. They allowed you to choose funds which invest in corporate bonds. If you wanted something very low risk, you could invest in corporate bonds issued by ASX listed companies. Commercial property as well as an option, although residential property is restricted, that's not permitted. And also into listed companies, so they could be large or small listed companies. So this combined pie chart shows you what we call the Complying Investment Framework. 2 of those are mandatory. You must invest at least 10% into venture capital private equity, and you must invest 30% of the capital of 1.5 million into small caps or listed companies under 500 million. And then the balancing investment is up to you. And what we often find is investors use the balancing investment as a way of reducing the risk of the portfolio. So commercial property or bonds tend to be the more popular options there. So we'll go through each of these elements in a little bit more detail. As I say today, the presentation is really just at high level, and we welcome any more detailed questions either after the presentation or later in this week. In terms of who can offer funds, the government has set a number of rules on this too. We have to have a license issued by ASIC, which is the regulatory body here for fund managers. We must have a VC fund, which is registered with another government department called AusIndustry. The fund manager must be Australian controlled and managed, so they must be based here in Australia, and they have to have at least $100 million of funds under management. And also one thing it's probably interesting to know is what's the typical process for an SRV application. So what we're currently seeing is any cases that come from Hong Kong get processed in Hong Kong, so they get processed at the consulate in Wan Chai. The cases from Wan Chai are taking probably 12 to 15 months at the moment to process. Processing times have been a little bit slow recently. But from the day you apply, if you apply for state nomination from Greg in Queensland, I know they turn that around very quickly. You'll be getting a response from Queensland within the week. Then you would go into the Australian federal government process, which is run by the Australian Department of Home Affairs. And that's the part that's processed in Hong Kong. So they have a team in Hong Kong who assess all applications, they review all the materials, and perform background checks, medical checks, and check on the source of funds for each applicant. And it's taking, it's somewhere up to a year to 15 months to process. And then at the end of that, they invite you to make a complying investment in Australia. So in terms of the investment, you don't have to make it until the end. That's when we normally get involved. Speaking to investors is right at the end when they've been through the process with their migration agent. And then when you invest, the visa is normally granted relatively shortly after that. So then you have to invest for a minimum of 4 years, a 4-year investment period. The visa does have the ability to be extended for up to 6 or 8 years. But I'm sure Anderson will go through that in a bit more detail. But you must maintain a complying investment for the period of your temporary visa, your 188C visa. When you get your permanent residency, you're free to take the money out, to take your capital back, and then you can do what you like. You and your family will hopefully then have permanent residency in Australia, and you have the right to remain invested or to take the money and invest in something else at that stage. Now, in terms of funds, I'll just show a couple of examples in our case, the Moelis Australia funds. In our case, we've got a venture capital private equity fund, which I'll go through. This fund has a minimum term of about 5 years, and we're looking at about 15% per annum returns on our investments that we make for that fund. We've got a small caps fund or emerging companies fund as well. These are listed companies. This fund is liquid. You can invest in it for as little as 1 month if you like. It's got a target return of about 7%. And those two are the two mandatory options. In terms of the balancing options, then we've got commercial property funds, bond funds, and equity funds. We've got about 8 or 9 funds across those 3 categories. And depending really on your risk profile and how much return you're looking for, you can choose to put all of your balancing investment or part of it in each of those funds. So you can mix and match. You can split it across the 3 components, or you can put all into property or bonds or split between those 2. Now, obviously, the returns on those funds will depend on the risk. So something like a bond fund with bonds issued by Australia's big 4 banks would be paying a low return of less than 1% probably, but you'd also be taking very little risk. So it depends on your risk profile, and your risk tolerance may change. You may start in bonds, for example, because you think the markets look expensive. The visa does allow you to switch as you go. So if your risk tolerance changes over the period of your visa, you can then switch into other products which deliver a higher return as you go. So the visa is flexible that way. It does allow you to switch during the term. You just need to make sure that the fund you're in does allow, because typically private equity or property funds may not allow liquidity during the period. So that should give you an idea, a sense of the returns you're looking for. As I mentioned, bond funds will always be lower return because they're lower risk. Equity funds generally higher because they take higher risk, higher volatility, and then commercial property funds somewhere in between. In terms of VC, we've got a fund, our VC fund. It's our 2nd fund now. It's been doing very well, very stable. It's run by Jaron. Jaron's been doing this for over 20 years and joined us from UBS in Sydney. And this fund is fully registered, which means the Australian government has given us a license, approval, and we report to them on a quarterly basis on the fund and the investments we're making. Now, one thing that almost all SIV investors have in common is that they are very risk averse. So most of our SIV investors, the very first question we're asked is, how can I get my capital back? How can you protect my capital? I want low risk investments. This is an investment for a family future. And of course, risk is the first thing that they consider. So getting their capital back is very important to them. And particularly the VC component can seem quite daunting. It can seem like it's a higher risk investment. And so it's very important for us to structure a fund which tries to reduce this risk wherever we can. And our fund's focus is primarily on later stage investments. We're not an early stage investor, we're not an angel investor. We don't invest in seed capital or those type of projects. Our investments are very much at the later stage, which are companies which have already been through the early growth stages and are now expanding That could be launching new products or expanding overseas, hiring new sales staff. So it's really, a lot of those companies have been de-risked. So our return expectations are more modest because we're taking a lot less risk. And that's really driven by our SRB investors and their preference for later stage investments. So we've made a number of investments. In fact, our most recent one is in Brisbane. Our first and last investment for the VC funds that we have now were in both in Queensland. So we think there's plenty of opportunities in Australia at the moment, and it's also possible to make good investments without taking a large amount of risk. So happy to take you through, there's a lot of detail behind this fund, take you through this at some stage or even have you join some of our webinars which are regularly given by our fund managers for investors in each fund. Now in terms of track record, as I mentioned, investors are very focused on this too because VC tends to be the part that they are most worried about. Our first fund has been doing quite well. It's very stable. We've already actually exited 3 of the investments, 3 of the 10, at an average multiple of 1.8 times. So we've almost doubled our money on these 3 investments, which have gone quite well. And we hope to exit a few more of these in the coming year or to year and a half. So the investors who invested in this fund previously have been very happy with how the funds performed. Notwithstanding, they were exactly the same as most investors. They were nervous about investing in private equity and venture capital in Australia, but as it's turned out, it's been quite a good investment for them today. The next component is the emerging companies, the 30% component, which is in listed companies on the stock market. So these are listed shares. They're not like the VC fund, which are private companies. These companies have been through that and they're now listed on the Australian Stock Exchange, but they must be under $500 million at the time you first invest. So the government has said that define these as small cap companies or emerging companies, and it's been a way for them to attract in capital from foreign investors into these companies to help them to grow in Australia. So there are a number of rules applied to this fund, which you will see on the left-hand side of the page. The fund is run by another very experienced equity specialist. His name is John Garrett. John's been doing this for many years, and he's been running our fund now for a few years, and the fund has performed very well. Even during COVID, we saw that the fund was quite stable, and that's notwithstanding equity markets have been very volatile this year. It's been very pleasing to see that this fund has come out the other side in very good shape. So just to give you an idea of the kind of investments we have in this fund, it's a very conservative fund, again, for the same reasons I mentioned earlier. SRV investors tend to have a very low risk tolerance. They prefer you to take less risk, and in that way to protect their capital as much as possible for the period of their visa. So the fund is designed very much with that in mind, and it invests more in more defensive areas of the economy. You know, for example, not a lot of the fund is invested in resources, because that's a sector that can be quite volatile during downturn. So we've got a fund which is built to be resilient, and that's proven to be exactly what it's done during the recent turmoil in the markets here in Australia. Now, moving on to the balancing investment, this is the part where you can choose. So this is the part where investors have an element of choice, and as I mentioned earlier, they can even switch between these components during the term of the visa if they like. So there are 3 main parts to that. There are commercial property. That's what I mean by commercial property are office, industrial, retail, healthcare, hospitality, hotels, pretty much properties that have long-term leases to corporate tenants. There is, as I mentioned, a restriction on residential. The government was not trying to attract in capital to the residential markets, so they restricted it to commercial property only. There's also the option of corporate bonds. This is the lowest risk option generally, which are bonds issued by ASX-listed companies. The majority of the bonds in Australia are issued by the big banks, so you'll see that most of the bond funds here will typically have the bank bonds invested in them. And then listed equities, similar to the small cap fund, except these listed equities can be in large or small. So many of the companies you would have heard of, the big banks, ANZ, CBA, Westpac, NAB, BHP Billiton, Rio, and so on, all of those companies would be eligible for in a managed fund here, equities issued by those companies. So I'll just give you a couple of examples. In our case, a commercial property fund, for example, we have a pooled fund, which is properties all over Australia, including 4 in Queensland. We've also got other funds which have single assets, so you may like one particular asset which could be an industrial shed or a shopping centre in any one location in Australia, and we have those funds from time to time as well. So it depends on your preference. If you want to have a single exposure to a single asset in the asset class, we can offer that, or you want to diversify your portfolio across a number of assets in different locations. Of course, we've got a property fund for that as well. The second option is bonds. Bonds are very popular at the moment, as you can imagine. Many investors want to avoid the volatility in the market and the uncertainty that equity markets are bringing. So they invest with our bond fund. And as I say, many of the names, you'll see the logos at the bottom of the page are names that will be familiar to you. Those bonds, 84% of this fund is invested in banks and major financial institutions. So it's a very low risk option. As I mentioned, the returns would be low to match the fact that the returns risk is low. But it's very popular at the moment because it offers stability, and this fund has been very stable. Its net asset value hasn't changed at all during the COVID period, which is exactly what the investors were looking for. And finally, listed equities is also an option for the balancing. In our case, we've got companies in the infrastructure funds and focused on the infrastructure, the REIT sector, and then the top 20 companies, which are basically the big banks and the mining companies here. Those funds are more volatile, of course. They are listed equities, so they can go up and down, but generally we find that over the longer term, and you're investing, if you think about this, you're investing for a 4-year period at least. Generally, these funds have done very well. In fact, they've been our best performing funds over the long term, but they can deliver short-term volatility. So most investors, given they're investing 40% in private equity and small caps, prefer to avoid listed equities for the balancing investment, but certainly the option is there if you like to invest in. So I'll just finish up very briefly. Why asset management? Why Moelis Australia Asset Management? Well, we've got a wide range of options. As I mentioned, we've got 5 billion of assets under management. We don't just do SIV funds, we do investments in credit, agriculture, commercial real estate, pubs, hotels, childcare, aged care, including many of these investments in Queensland. But investments all over Australia, as I mentioned, for investors from all over the world, including institutional and high net worth investors. All of our investor reports are available in English and Mandarin, so all of our online access is available in Chinese. Our reports are all printed in English and Chinese as well and sent to investors. For the SIV funds, they're sent every 6 months. And we have regular webinars. So one thing we've done during the COVID period is we've tried to increase our level of communication with our investors, many of whom are overseas and can't get here at the moment. And we know that normally we would like to meet our investors at least once or twice a year, but many of them can't come here. So we've tried to replace that by having online seminars like this. So thanks to you, Anderson, for hosting to get the message out. But also we host webinars ourselves, and we often have one-on-one calls for our fund managers with our clients directly. It's just a way of communicating with people at the moment when they're not able to travel to Australia. As I mentioned, we've got a team spread across Asia, including here in Sydney, Melbourne, in Hong Kong, Shanghai, and also in Beijing. So Catherine and Jimmy are based there for us in Hong Kong. Hopefully, Anderson, you'll meet them soon. And hopefully, if you have clients who have questions, I'm sure Catherine and Jimmy will be happy to go and meet them with you in person there in Hong Kong. All right, I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much. We covered a lot of information in a short space of time, but I think it's just good to give you an introduction and give people a chance to ask questions either today or later on. Happy to filter the questions through you, Anderson, and we can follow up with any questions they have on the investment for the SIV. So thank you very much again.
Thanks a lot for Enda's presentation. We should go to the Q&A section. So we show all our free screen on the to audience. We already gathered 3 questions from our client that they want to know. So the first one is that about 1AAA and 132A. they are concerning is their preferred business or which industry that the Australia government or Queensland government will encourage the applicant to set up office. Is there any this kind of question preference?
Yes, obviously, for knowledge-based industries, very much preferred across Australia and certainly in Queensland as well. Also very popular in Queensland because of our agriculture production. So a number of people have set up wholesale type businesses here, and they export our agricultural produce, and also our beef cattle produce back to Asia as well. So there's those two. Tourism is often another one as well. Hospitality, hotel sector. So that's another big one for us here in Queensland. And of course the construction industry as well. So, commercial real estate, large residential real estate as well. So we don't have a preference. We want our migrant investors to invest in areas that they have an experience in, that they're confident in, and certainly if they come and visit me here in Brisbane, certainly happy to give them some greater insight towards the investment opportunities that we have here. No, we don't prescribe it. We want people to invest in industries and companies that they feel most comfortable in.
Yes, thank you. Then that's I think great to know by potential applicants. And then the second question that we have is that about 1AAB. How easy or difficult for applicants to prove themselves with direct investment experience to qualify the 1AAB visa requirement? Because most of the time they are concerned how can I prove myself? For example, they will imagine, do I need to have a daily stock trade or weekly? Or what kind of investment can provide me, prove me to be qualified? And I think this question is for Greg as well.
188B, we look there for a broad investment experience. So the applicant might have bought and sold property, bought and sold shares, bought and sold different companies. So it's about the broad base of their investment experience. That's the key. So someone who's just done online trading, yes, that goes some way towards it, but to satisfy the criteria of that one, you need to demonstrate a fairly broad brush of investment experience.
Then that means the applicant should have a broad base or broad source of investment experience instead of, for example, just trade stocks. It's not like that, right?
No, it's supposed to. It's a specialist area for the investor, right? So. But the key is that they've actually bought and sold things. So it's not an accumulation type investment, right? It's to be a professional investor. You've bought and you've sold, and you've got in different categories and bought and sold. So it's about that experience in investing and actually making money in that process.
Okay, thank you. And the third question that it seems is potential applicants for 1AAC is concerned 2 million out of 5 million need to be invested in relatively high risk products. Of course, and just introduce your products. But however, they want to know how risky is the requirement needed for the 2 million. and then any approach to reduce or control the risk, for example, held by Moelis?
Sure. I just think that's a good question we get asked most often, I think. It's probably worth considering that across that 2 million, in our case, that 2 million is probably split across 60 or 70 different companies. So if you think about it, our VC fund will have, by the time it's fully mature, will have about 10 investments. The small cap fund will have at any time anything 50 and 50 investments in there. So you're splitting that 2 million across a wide range of companies in different sectors. You're even investing in some of the companies at different levels. So you could be investing in as equity or convertible note or preferred equity. So you're able to reduce your risk a number of different ways. The other thing to note is that we've actually been through probably the most volatile period any of us have ever known in our lifetime. And what you'll see is that the funds have held up very well. So VC fund hasn't, small cap fund, in fact, if you invested a year ago in a small cap fund, you'd still be up, despite all the turbulence, about 2% in that fund during that period of time. So I think that's a good sign for investors that despite all of this and despite the volatility, the funds, particularly the VC and small cap funds, have been quite resilient. And remember, at the end of the day, you are investing over a 4-year period of time. And certainly our experience has been for investors that those investors who've been there for 4 years have done quite well. And we can do that, as I mentioned, the strategies we adopt we invest for the VC fund in later stage investments, risk, investing higher in the capital structure to try and reduce risk for investors as well. It's more as much capital as we can within the framework of the SRV. We can use derivatives as well in the fund for risk management purposes to try and reduce risk further. And then we can target investments which are in the less volatile sectors, so areas like real estate or industrials, and less into areas like technology and resources, which can be more volatile. So each fund we've built has been designed specifically to try and reduce volatility, reduce risk for investors.
Okay, thanks a lot for the detailed introduction and explanation. So I think today is almost out of time. We are expected to finish 7:30. Thanks for your help today, Greg and Enda. So I hope we have another chance later to launch another webinar soon. See you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. 咁大家咧就今日嘅 webinar 就結束㗎啦。剛才我嘅 PowerPoint 啦，或者係詳細嘅資料嘅話，可以聯絡翻我哋中原移民啦 Centerline Immigration 啦，咁就會俾翻個資訊俾大家嘅，同埋我哋亦都會有專門嘅移民顧問去解答大家關於澳洲移民嘅問題嘅。咁好多謝大家先，咁今日嘅 webinar 結束㗎啦finish today. Thank you. Thanks all.